Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I would like to begin by recognizing that we are gathered on the traditional territory of Treaty 6 and also acknowledge and recognize Métis people who share a deep connection with this land. I'm Irfan Sabir, Alberta New Democrat, Shadow Minister for Justice. I'm joined here by a number of folks. Nahid Tenshi, leader of Alberta New Democrats, my MLA colleagues, Court Ellingson, Shadow Minister for Finance, Julia Hayter, Shadow Minister for Status of Women, and I'm also joined by Brooks Arkin-Paul, Shadow Minister for Indigenous Relations. We have a number of folks joining from Alberta Law Foundation: Byron, Janet, Sarah, Virginia, Moira, and Drew, and Kathy from Community Legal Clinic, Central Alberta, Debbie and Tiffany from Edmonton Community Legal Center, and Drew from Indigenous Bar Association. Thank you, everyone, again, for joining us. A little over a month ago, the UCP introduced their 2025 budget, a budget that did nothing to serve Albertans, a budget filled with nothing other than cuts, chaos, and corruption. The UCP's latest cut, access to justice. In its latest budget, the UCP government announced it would cut funding to Legal Aid Alberta by $22 million. Legal Aid is a vital organization that supports vulnerable Albertans, protects their rights, and ensures a fair and accessible justice system. Yet, repeatedly, the UCP has failed to honor their governance agreement with Legal Aid Alberta, treating this essential service as an afterthought. Their negligence reached a crisis point last year when they couldn't even complete a basic contract on time, pushing Legal Aid Alberta to the brink of having to close its doors completely. It's clear that this government cannot be trusted with legal aid. Now, in yet another attempt to abdicate their duty, they are cutting funding to legal aid, but this time they're also trying to shift the legal aid funding burden onto Alberta Law Foundation. The Alberta Law Foundation currently supports over 65 organizations that provide legal assistance, advance legal reform, and improve access to justice for all Albertans. By cutting funding for legal aid and forcing the Alberta Law Foundation to pay the price, the UCP is also jeopardizing the funding for 65 organizations the foundation support and the important work those organizations do. And to make things worse, they have introduced new legislation that forces any grant over $250,000 to get government approval, giving politicians the final say over funding decisions that should be independent and nonpartisan. This is not okay. The Alberta Law Foundation funds programs and initiatives that countless Albertans depend on. Jeopardizing these programs could have devastating impacts. I will now turn things over to Byron from the Law Foundation to provide more details on this.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. I'm Byron Chan, the Executive Director of the Alberta Law Foundation. We're here today because Bill 39 marks a fundamental shift in how legal services are funded for the most vulnerable in this province, and because those changes are already having serious consequences. This bill does two things. First, it cuts the government's own contribution to legal aid and shifts that burden to Alberta Law Foundation, a fund that was never meant to shoulder core justice system costs that have always been the provincial government's responsibility. Second, it requires the Minister of Justice to approve and provides him with the ability to block any Alberta Law Foundation grant over $250,000, a threshold that applies to almost all of our work, resulting in the politicization of the funding and provision of crucial legal services across the province. Despite assurances that these changes would not impact funding for community-based organizations and current initiatives, the Minister has already exercised this new authority to deny or reduce nearly $10 million in funding that had recently been approved by the Foundation's board, affecting 14 nonprofit organizations across Alberta. This, while the government seeks to take more than $68 million from Alberta Law Foundation this year through the bill's doubling of the Foundation's statutory contribution to legal aid. These funding denials and cuts come at the expense of community and student legal clinics, Indigenous justice initiatives, and programs supporting vulnerable youth, survivors of violence, and newcomers. It has also halted the development of an Indigenous Law Institute based out of the University of Alberta, which was set to be a transformative, once-in-a-generation opportunity to advance reconciliation and Indigenous legal research and education in this province. These are not theoretical impacts. These are programs and services Albertans rely on every single day. We have repeatedly attempted to reach out to the minister in hopes of collaborating on a more balanced and sustainable solution. Ultimately, these offers have not been taken up, and the bill has continued through the legislature without consultation. In response, 2 government-appointed board members of the Alberta Law Foundation's board have resigned. They did so because they could not support a process that inserts political control into what has always been a nonpartisan, independent, and profession-governed system. Their decisions were not made lightly. These are respected professionals and leaders in our community who believe in the Foundation's mandate and in a justice system that puts people and principles above politics. We share their grave concerns, and we echo the call for the government to reconsider this path before more damage is done to the justice system's independence, to public trust, and to countless individuals and communities across Alberta. This legislation is destabilizing, unnecessary, and presents a threat to the entire legal sector. We stand here today urging the government to reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you, Byron. I will now turn things over to Drew to say a few words.
Tansi kakiau, gina skumtenawau, kakiau nitsane kegua netotama, drulafon nitsegasun, maske gloikutsinia. My name is Drew Lafond. I am the president of the Indigenous Bar Association in Canada. As a not-for-profit organization nationally representing Indigenous lawyers, judges, academics, law students, and paralegals, Bill 39 gives the Indigenous Bar Association and the Indigenous legal community as a whole pause and apprehension. The IBA is deeply concerned about the changes proposed in Bill 39 and the effect that it's going to have on access to justice and the ability of Indigenous peoples to access an equitable and fair justice system. One of the things that the Alberta Law Foundation has been instrumental in providing is access to justice, is the ability of Indigenous peoples to fair trials, to fair proceedings, to lawyers, to legal advocates, and to the ability to have their rights and their voices heard and adjudicated. Now, one of the problems with the amendments that have been introduced in the bill is the excessive oversight that it will give the provincial government to be able to influence judicial outcomes through denying access to justice. On behalf of the Indigenous Bar Association, I think its impediment, one of the impediments introduced under our justice system is financial barriers. And it's the grant programs that have been administered by the Alberta Law Foundation that have done a significant duty and service to justice by eliminating a lot of the financial barriers of the disadvantaged and vulnerable sectors in Alberta's society. An investment in an equitable justice system requires financial commitments, it requires independence, and it requires minimal political interference to ensure that the justice and a fair and equitable justice system comes to fruition. It requires an investment in programs, and it requires an investment in bricks and mortar to ensure the long-term sustainability of those programs. Thank you.
And thank you, Drew, for your remarks. Now I will hand things over to Kathy for her remarks.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Kathy Parsons, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the 5 legal clinics and the many other frontline legal service providers across this country, or across this province, who are directly affected by this bill. Every day we work with Albertans who are navigating crisis, family breakdown, domestic violence, eviction, income insecurity, and many other serious legal issues. And right now, demand is growing. When the economy tightens, the need for legal supports and services, especially in areas like housing, family law, and protection orders. This is the worst time to be pulling funding away from the community legal services Albertans rely on every day to access justice. Bill 39 has already blocked over $10 million in grant funding, including grants that keep legal clinics like ours operating and providing these crucial legal services. For my organization, this has meant more than a $500,000 a year funding reduction over the next 3 years. This isn't a theoretical policy change and will directly impact everyday Albertans' ability to address serious legal issues and who have no other place to turn for legal help. That means fewer lawyers helping clients. It means fewer legal services in rural areas where almost 50% of my organization's clients live. Longer wait times for people in legal crisis, and generally legal issues do not improve with time and end up wasting valuable and expensive court time. To be very clear, this isn't government funding, and we're not asking for public funds from a deficit budget. These funds are set aside specifically for the work that we do, and they come from lawyers' trust accounts to do this work on behalf of Albertans. We are asking for those who are making these decisions to come to the table and talk to us about the work that we do and how crucial it is to everyday Albertans facing serious legal issues. We are urging the government to consult, to reconsider, and to protect access to justice, especially for those who need it most. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I will now turn things over to Nahid Nancy, leader of Alberta New Democrats.
Well, thank you very much, Irfan, and thank you all for being here to talk about an issue that is critical to the kind of community we're trying to build here in Alberta. I mean, look, this may feel a bit esoteric to a lot of Albertans. I think people may be saying, well, I'm not a lawyer. I've never been in trouble with the legal system. I've never had a lawyer. Why does this matter? And I want to highlight 2 very critical things here. The first is that access to justice for everyone is a cornerstone of a democratic society. And as we've just heard from Kathy, if we are cutting access to vulnerable folks in rural areas, Indigenous people, people who are at the margins of society, who find themselves, often through no fault of their own, in trouble with the law, in something that could ruin their lives and ruin their family's trajectory. And we're saying, you're not important enough. You're not important enough for us to care about you. That's what this government is saying. This is fundamentally wrong. The second reason is something that offends me as someone who believes in government. Imagine the following. Imagine if the government went into your bank account and said, we're going to take away part of your bank account to pay for something that we should be paying for and we've always paid for. And then they say, we're going to tell you you can't donate to charities that you want to donate to. We're going to tell you which charities you're going to make your charitable donations to. That is what this government is doing. The most corrupt government in Alberta's history is asking us to trust them to determine what important nonprofit initiatives should be funded in the province. It's not their money. This is not taxpayer money. This is government reaching in and taking private money and spending it on things that they are interested in doing. A government that says it believes in freedom is, in fact, the most authoritarian government Alberta has ever seen. So let's be clear. Cuts, chaos, corruption, cruelty. This government has a history of cutting critical services. They cut healthcare, they cut education funding, they cut income supports. Now they're cutting access to justice. They sow chaos. They pick fights with everybody. They're picking fights with doctors, they're picking fights with teachers, they're destabilizing the economy, and let's be honest, they're doing this because they want to pick fights with lawyers. They see lawyers as too powerful. They see lawyers as not doing what the government wants in their work to actually access justice. They're trying to sow chaos. This government is defined by the word corruption. They have a history of political interference and corruption, consistently giving Albertans money to their friends and insiders, compromising independent processes, political interference and meddling, partisan control, choosing corrupt care over health care, and now they want to interfere in how an independent legal foundation supports Albertans at risk, the most vulnerable of Albertans. So I've talked a lot over the last month about cuts, chaos, and corruption, but now we have to add a fourth C, cruelty. This is the pattern. Their cuts, their chaos, their corruption consistently are aimed at the most vulnerable people in society. They punch down instead of offering a hand up. This is who they are. They're trying to balance their budget, which they haven't even come close to doing, on the backs of kids undergoing cancer treatment, and now jeopardizing access to justice. Access to justice is not optional. It is a pillar of our democracy. Democracy doesn't work without it. This government callously cuts service after service. To them, it's a line item in the budget, but this is even more. This means that stripping support for low-income Albertans, from sexual assault survivors, from Indigenous people and Indigenous legal programs, from youth justice initiatives, and dozens of community organizations that help people fall through the cracks of the formal legal system. Minister Mickey Amery has said he and he alone will determine who deserves access to justice. And he's already said no to over $10 million of grants that are meant to support the most vulnerable, and perhaps most egregiously on one of our most important commitments to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the creation of the Indigenous Law Centre at the University of Alberta, which is no longer going to happen because Mickey Amery doesn't want it to happen. This is extraordinarily disappointing. And what is disappointing even more is why they're doing it. They're not doing it because they want to be a better government. They're not doing it because they want to be fiscally responsible. They're cutting essential services because they have to pay for their own waste and corruption. From Turkish Tylenol that no one needed, to bloated contracts handed to insiders, to warehouses full of expired medical suppliers bought from friends of the UCP. The cuts have to end, the chaos has to end, the corruption has to end, and the cruelty must end. Access to justice should not depend on politics, and it should not depend on how Mickey Amery woke up this morning and what he had for breakfast. Access to justice means access to justice for all, and Albertans deserve so much better. The good news is, better is possible. So with that, we'd love to take any questions.
If you are on the phone or on Zoom and you'd like to ask a question, on Zoom, please raise your hand. On the phone, press star 9. Sorry, just 9. And if you're in the room, please come on over to me so we can get your voice into the feed. Johnny, did you want to start? Sure. Johnny Wakefield from the Edmonton Journal.
Thank you. This might be a question best asked to the Law Society. I'm just trying to understand why the government can make these decisions about the Law Foundation's funding, because it sounds like it's independent, but is it like was it created by the legislature? Or like, why is the government able to say what it does with its money? I'll turn it over to them in a moment, but I'll answer the political part of that question, which is government has power to legislate things. And this is why this is so shocking, because this is an independent organization. They can explain better where the money comes from, but it's the money from the trust accounts that lawyers hold on behalf of their clients. This is how this foundation was set up to deal with it. And it's shocking to me that not only is the government meddling with the affairs of a self-governing profession, they're meddling with an independent organization, and best of all, they made it retroactive. So this bill has not even passed, and the minister is already cutting funding to these critical organizations. This is on the very, very boundaries, and I'm no lawyer, but it's the very, very boundaries of what I would consider legally or ethically permissible. Without Bill 39, couldn't do this, essentially. The Bill 39 gives the power. Okay.
you want to jump in? Or, because you know, I'm not a lawyer. You guys can explain what I'm really trying to say.
No, Leader Nenshi did an accurate job. This authority wasn't in place over the 52 years of the history of the foundation. And to my knowledge, it's not in place for any other law foundation in any other jurisdiction in Canada. These changes have been brought about through the tabling of Bill 39, and because government has the power to legislate it into being. This is primarily why we are here today. We felt this is important enough to make Albertans aware of these changes and how significant a departure it is from the intent of why the Law Foundation was established in 1973.
Jasmine King from Global Edmonton.
I guess I'm not sure who might be best to answer this, but with the funding cuts, I mean, how many Albertans would this affect? Like, how many less people would now be able to access justice because of this?
With the legal clinics, there's 5 of them in Alberta, and we serve thousands of clients each. Together, we serve far more clients than legal aid does. So we're probably talking tens of thousands of Albertans who will no longer have help to access justice.
And for those who will still see this funding and will be able to help them out, I mean, how much longer will it take for them to maybe get to court and hear their trial? I mean, will it really speed, like, will that now be delayed a lot more because there is less?
What we've seen recently is an increase in need, an increase in the complexity of need of our individuals, families, and communities across this province. This requires a larger investment in social services and legal services, since that's what the Law Foundation has been established to do from its inception. What we know is that the spillover effects of denied funding or reduced capacity for existing services is that organizations will no longer be able to keep up with demand. Many of the applications that came before our board that were approved and subsequently reduced or denied by the government came with a request for an increase to keep up with the cost of living, an increase to keep up with the demand for services that current capacity constraints are limiting organizations from meeting. So as a result of those cuts, thousands and thousands of Albertans are going to be left with either longer wait times, without access to services at all, or without without an organization that's within their geographic region to be able to access services.
Sean Amatos, City News.
Just wondering if you could expand on that, sir. You say that they will not have access to justice, but I mean, legally they have to have a lawyer, right? So you're saying that the quality of their defense is going to go down? Can you explain that, please?
Legal aid provides lawyers for the province's most vulnerable. However, there's a financial eligibility guideline by which if an individual earns over a certain amount, they are no longer eligible for legal aid services. The Law Foundation funds over 65 programs and services across the provinces to meet the legal needs of our citizens who do not qualify for legal aid but who still cannot afford a lawyer. So by virtue of these funding cuts, unfortunately, I wish it were the reality that everybody could have a lawyer. What these cuts mean is that many individuals may go without a lawyer, and it goes beyond having direct legal representation. The services and the programs that we fund are about legal research and law reform, public legal education and information, the types of services that are available and have benefits for the mass in the province. And when these resources dwindle, so do the services that are provided to Albertans.
For Mr. Nenshi, you've talked about being a fan of balanced budgets. Obviously, Alberta is in some budgeting trouble. The minister says this is about finding efficiencies. Can you agree with him that there are any good efficiencies in here? Because that as well.
Well, because this is not about finding efficiencies. This is about going into a private charitable foundation and stealing their money, not only to pay for a core government service of legal aid, but also so that they are dictating how this private foundation can grant money to charities and nonprofits. So this isn't even, the big chunk of this isn't even about the government's budget. It's about the government spending other people's money on other things that they think are more important. So there's no efficiencies here. The government has tried and tried and tried to cut legal aid as the province's population grows, but they do have a charter requirement to give people some modicum of access to justice. But this isn't even about the budget. This is entirely about power and control. I want to highlight one thing for you. I want to highlight two things for you, to just be very clear. Only part of this story is about legal aid. Legal aid is the provision of lawyers for people who are very vulnerable, who find themselves in trouble with the law, who require a lawyer. Part of this is about the government consistently underfunding and defunding legal aid. Part of it is about their dreams, because they get all of their hints from US TV, of turning legal aid into a law and order style public defender system. Part of it is about that. The bigger part of this is about all of the other things that the Alberta Law Foundation does. So you heard from Kathy that community legal centers in Alberta. So that's where you go if you don't need a legal aid lawyer, but you need legal advice. You need help. You are stuck in a situation that could really ruin your family, and you need to talk to somebody. And what did you say? Many times more people are served by community legal centers than by legal aid. And that's already been cut. $500,000 in Kathy's case. So these are the things that we're really focused on. And I want to highlight one other thing. The Alberta Law Foundation has been around as long as I've been alive. And in all that time, you have never seen the Alberta Law Foundation stand up to government the way they've been forced to today. They're an institution in our province. And I want to tell you that it took extraordinary courage for these folks to come and stand here today. And that courage is born of the fact that they believe strongly that every Albertan deserves justice. This government is full of bullies. These people will pay a price for standing up to this government. But they knew it had to be done. And it had to be done because the needs of Albertans are more important than the political whims of Mickey Amory, Danielle Smith, and this government. So I, for one, am deeply grateful for everyone who's standing here today.
Thank you.
For 52 years, the Law Foundation has implemented robust processes in working diligently with our community-based organizations, understanding the work that they do relative to the need in their community and the value proposition of the funds that they're seeking. We've worked with some of the organizations that we fund for as long as we have been in existence. And we are the primary and often the sole funder for many access initiatives across the province. This process has always been, these grants have always been recommended to an independent board of directors who have their own process to review and assess and ultimately make the decisions of whether to approve or deny these grants. And this process has always been independent. The foundation has done this in its current processes, in its current structures for 52 years and managed to simultaneously effectively meet the legal needs of the community today while also balancing out the financial sustainability and needs of the sector for future years. So these changes present a significant and material threat and change to the way that the foundation has operated.
Thanks, Johnny. Jasmine has one more question.
Is there any risk now that with the lack of funding that there will be chances that these cases expire and that the people won't get that access to justice in that way because, yeah, the case will expire at all?
I think if you're talking about the Jordan principles, that requires that cases be dealt with either in 18 months in case of summary conviction and 30 months in the event it's an indictable offense. So we are already seeing delays. Government used to publish numbers which will show how many cases are beyond 18 months or 30 months. They stopped publishing that. Instead, now they only share information about how many Jordan applications have been made. So we have heard from all stakeholders that to address those, you have to have better resources, better resourcing of our court system. And there is research out there. There are organizations who have made the case that when people are represented, things can process more efficiently in the court system. So when you're cutting all these access to justice initiatives, when you're cutting people's representation, that will certainly impact the court processes, and it will cause further delays and put more cases at risk of being thrown out as a result of Jordan decision.
Thank you, Jasmine. We're going to go to the phone now, and Michelle Bellefontaine from CBC is on the line. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I had a question for both of you, so I can hear myself. It's very strange. Okay. I had a question for Kathy and for Drew, and I'm wondering if both of you could expand a little bit about your concerns about access to justice for Indigenous people and for women who are facing domestic violence at home.
Certainly. So to answer that question, and thank you very much for that, one of the things that I wanted to raise today was the impacts that this will have on access to justice for Indigenous people, specifically Indigenous women. The relationship between Indigenous peoples and the justice system is a complicated one, although we know a lot about it because in the last 30 years there have been at least 20 reports, inquiries, commissions that have come to very similar conclusions about what the recommendations are to improve the relationship between Indigenous peoples and the justice system. The recommendations are clear. How to protect Indigenous women was the focal point of the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. The calls to justice in that report have been highlighted and will continue to be highlighted by the Indigenous Bar Association. Will continue to advocate on behalf of the rights of Indigenous peoples and women. Now, Alberta was a leader when it comes to the relationship between Indigenous peoples and the justice system. Former Chief Justice of the Provincial Court of Alberta, Justice Redmond, had released a very aggressive, a very forward-thinking Alberta Indigenous justice strategy, which called for the protection of Indigenous women and for the provision of additional wraparound services to provide not only access to justice, but a secure place for Indigenous women, for vulnerable Indigenous peoples within their communities to find protection and find security. Because we know right now that it isn't just about advocacy in the courtroom, it's about advocacy to improve socioeconomic conditions as a whole. What we're seeing now from the provincial government in the introduction of Bill 39 is distrust in the ability of independent organizations and Indigenous peoples themselves to chart their own destiny. And that's something that's deeply concerning because it squarely challenges all of the recommendations in over 20 national reports that have been released in the last 30 years. And that's something that's deeply concerning to me as a lawyer, as an Indigenous person, as a former resident of Alberta, and something that I certainly want to make sure does not go unrectified.
These cuts significantly impact the clients that we're trying to serve. Much of last year, we had wait lists of 6 to 8 weeks for someone to even speak with a lawyer. If you're a woman facing domestic violence, looking for child support so you can feed your kids, or maybe even threatened with losing your housing, you don't have 6 to 8 weeks to find out what you can do about it. And that is a common thing. And the funding, we had asked for an increase in funding to directly deal with those wait list times and to have more lawyer time available so that people can get the services that they need in a timely fashion, because their time is not necessarily, you don't have months to necessarily deal with these things, particularly in those kind of extreme situations. So that's what our funding got cut for. We can't deal with the need that we have now, never mind the need that we know is coming as the economy continues to tighten and make more people vulnerable to the system.
Michelle, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, and thank you to both Drew and for Kathy for that. I wanted to ask, sorry here, I'm having a hard time hearing this feed, so Paul, I think it is, who is, I'm sorry, who's the head of the?
Byron.
Byron, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. It's very hard to hear this on Zoom, so I'm just kind of hoping I can listen to the YouTube feed after. Byron, Mr. Nenshi indicated that a couple minutes ago that it took extraordinary courage for you guys to stand up, because normally you don't speak out about this stuff, and that there's concerns that you will pay a price. Do you have those concerns? And if you do, can you tell me a little bit more about how you're feeling?
Yeah, like Leader Nenshi stated, for 52 years we've existed as a relative unknown entity in the province. And we've relished the role of being able to put our head down and fulfill our mandate and empower and provide supports to community-based organizations to meet the legal needs of the most vulnerable. And we've enjoyed being able to do that without the need for any recognition or very little fanfare. It's not our preference to be standing up here. It's not our preference to be up here standing and challenging the government. It's always been our desire to work collaboratively with the government of Alberta, because we believe, and we've always believed, that if we work together, that the justice system is only better off. Our desire to stand up here today is not about making a show or a statement. It's about standing up for what is right. And when we speak of the risk, we understand the risk of standing up alongside any political party, independent of who this party is. But we have always been a nonpartisan organization. We will always be a nonpartisan organization, which is why we need to speak up against the control and oversight that is being exercised over us with the passage of Bill 39.
All right, thank you very much for that. Mr. Nenshi has some comments he would like to make.
Yeah, just to wrap up, was that it for the queue? Okay, so just to wrap up then, I just want to highlight the fact that we deserve so much better. This is a government that consistently shows that they want citizens to be scared of their government. And what we've proven today is that this government should be scared of its citizens. In other words, that citizens who stand up for themselves, who stand up for their rights, who stand up for the kind of government they want, is who Premier Smith, Minister Amory, and the UCP government need to be listening to. And they just are not. They use bullying tactics, they use corruption, chaos, cuts, and cruelty as their operating principle. That is no way to run a government. The good news is better is possible. And Albertans are asking for something very simple. They're asking for decency. They're asking for compassion. They're asking for an ethical and a competent government. We've had that in Alberta for a long time. It is not too much to ask. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you all for following this story and for being here. And let's make sure every single Albertan gets the access to justice that they deserve.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes the news conference.